The Great Escape. Chapter 1. Leaving Home. After completing the coming-of-age ceremony, I set up my dome in a remote location 2 hours southeast of the king's palace. One day, while I was working on traditional masks, an alert went off indicating a power drain. Upon inspection, I discovered that the power crystal for my dome had decayed to an unacceptable level and only had 3 days of power left. This was unexpected, as the power crystals were supposed to last for months, and I had only inserted this one 3 weeks ago. I couldn't think of any recent installations that could have caused this, leading me to believe that the power crystal was low-grade and defective. I was furious and muttered a curse under my breath. This setback not only threatened to miss my deadline for delivering the masks to the temple, but also risked a fine or revocation of my artisan license from the king's palace. With only 9 days until the deadline, I calculated that I needed to leave immediately to reach a supplier located 5 hours due north, purchase a new power crystal, and return within 1 day. It was a race against time to save my livelihood and reputation. Chapter 2. The Perils of Procurement. With a sense of urgency, I quickly shut off power supply to all but my life support systems and security grid. I logged a personal report of my trip for the next few days and sent a copy to my parents. I fired up my chariot and set off before the noon sun. I always took pride in keeping my chariot clean, fueled up, and ready to go, knowing I could easily make the trip and back before needing to refuel again. In my backpack, I had a projectile weapon, a communications device, payment credits, an SOS beacon, and a regeneration kit for wounds. The autopilot plotted a course out of Savannah Valley, across the arid desert, and through the volcanoes to the crystal mines and refinery. My options were limited. I could either go to the King's Palace refinery and pay 3 times the market price for a power crystal, risk buying another faulty crystal from a freelance trader, or go to the source and obtain a pure crystal, which required the long and arduous trip I had embarked on. The valley where I lived was safe and peaceful, but the desert was desolate and treacherous, especially if one were to get stranded with no fuel. The real problem was passage through the volcanoes where rebels, outcasts, and scavengers thrived. Many citizens risked being mugged when traveling without a security warrior escort. Refined crystal deliveries were also regularly hijacked during transport. The King's Palace issued a decree forbidding transportation of refined crystals soon after, and since very few knew the refining process, the raw ore was useless to robbers, who then switched to hijacking other precious commodities. Chapter 3. A Night to Remember. After a smooth journey through the desert, I had no reason to expect any trouble on my trip through the volcanoes. The robbers typically targeted the outbound journey as it was more profitable. I arrived a half-hour early before the refinery closed for business. I paid 1 week's wages in payment credits for a fresh power crystal that would last my dome another 5 to 6 months. I also picked up a new engraving tool and some extra supplies for my workshop. It was early evening and I didn't want to risk traveling back at night, so I booked an overnight suite at the tavern nearby and went to clean up. I spent the evening socializing at the bar, fraternizing with young Afro Apes of low floor price, and drinking fermented coconut juice. I enjoyed rolling dice with the degen apes and scoring alpha with shills. In our kingdom, good business reputation is a priority, and nothing is true if it can't be verified on the blockchain. Afro Apes prefer to socialize and bond by sharing future business opportunities. Makonde history is a long record of heroic deeds and successful business deals between citizens. Records begin from the birth of our tribe 100 generations ago. It was a night filled with laughter, business talk, and good memories. Chapter 4. The Morning After. I woke up in my overnight suite early the next day, with leftover food and drink piled up in the bin. It seems that 2 young female Afro Apes had followed me back to my suite for further socializing. One female with pink fur was still asleep on the mat, while the other one lying beside me had bluish fur and large hooped earrings. I guess she was an Igbo female Afro Ape from the western region, which is almost 12 days travel away, and I couldn't help but wonder why she was so far from home. I didn't want to risk waking her up and having an awkward conversation about the previous night's events. It was all a blur, and a fond memory with no further commitment. Like my buddy used to say, stack sats before starting a family. I left a thank you message in the tavern guest log and vanished like morning mist. My chariot was secured nearby, and I quickly set off, feeling good. The autopilot plotted a route outbound from the mining town refinery. I checked my backpack and pulled out my weapon, ready for any trouble. Makonde Afro Apes, both male and female, are required to have weapons training and hand-to-hand combat skills. It is a tradition that endured ever since the early days when neighboring tribes frequently invaded. Personally, I prefer to talk my way out of trouble, but I always have a weapon handy in case diplomacy fails. Chapter 5. The Scavenger Chase. As I traveled out through the volcano passage, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. My suspicions were confirmed when 2 vehicles began following me into the desert. I quickly launched a reconnaissance drone into the sky from my chariot. The device recorded audio-visual information and streamed it to my personal node on the blockchain. It hovered 300 feet above and also streamed back location data of the 2 vehicles in hot pursuit. Both vehicles were filled with scavenger gang baboons, with scavenger body markings and patchy mutant fur, a result of mixed breeding and gene splicing experiments. The scavengers were gaining ground and there was no way to evade them in the open desert. Calculations indicated I was a half-hour away from the edge of the desert and the first security checkpoint into savanna grassland territory. Even if I called for help, my people would not arrive in time to assist. These scavenger baboons were not just after power crystals and payment credits, but probably a ransom payment too. If that wasn't paid, they'll probably kill me. The scavengers began firing projectiles at my chariot in an effort to slow me down. I engaged in evasive maneuvers and pushed my throttle to maximum speed to stay out of range. Reaching into my backpack, I pulled out the SOS beacon and fired it into the midday sky. A green arc of light with trailing smoke lit up above my location, indicating that security warriors at the checkpoint would be alerted and come out to investigate. Even if they arrived too late, at least they would find my hovering reconnaissance drone unit and have some evidence. Chapter 6. Outrunning the Scavengers. Even at my chariot's top speed, the scavengers had caught up and were preparing to fire a harpoon gun to reel me in. My chariot is equipped with collision avoidance technology and high-grade tactical software, allowing me to evade targeting scans from the scavenger vehicle. However, they had to come within 20 feet to manually fire the harpoon, which was close enough for me to shoot projectiles from my weapon into their engine intake. The first scavenger vehicle's engine burst into flames and veered off course violently, colliding into a sand dune. The baboons on board scrambled out of the vehicle to escape the inferno, screaming and cursing at their miscalculation. The second scavenger vehicle was still in pursuit and decided to use a different strategy, knowing I had a weapon. They sped on via a shortcut and attempted to cut me off. Their vehicles were faster on desert terrain, and knowledge of the territory gave them an advantage. My chariot was almost on savanna grassland, and I could tip the scales in my favor if only I could reach familiar territory. Chapter 7. A Desperate Escape. The scavengers were in position as I arrived at the edge of desert territory, and they opened fire with weapons. My chariot was hit and speed dropped to half impulse. I was also hit and sustained minor injuries. I reached into my backpack for the regeneration kit and patched up the wound, while the autopilot attempted to evade target lock and heavy fire from the pursuing scavengers and their projectile weapons. I used the comms device from my backpack to call the nearest checkpoint for help. Apparently, the security warriors had detected the green light from the SOS beacon fired earlier and were en route to intercept. They had heavy armaments and were well equipped. The second scavenger vehicle had caught up to my chariot. My weapon was out of ammo, and security assistance was still out of range. As a last-ditch effort, I set the hovering reconnaissance drone unit on a collision course with the scavenger vehicle. From a height of 300 feet, the RD unit came hurtling down and exploded into the remaining scavenger vehicle. The scavenger baboons were in disbelief as their vehicle burst into flames and left them stranded inside savanna grassland territory. The tables had turned, and the hunters had become the hunted. Chapter 8: The Aftermath. The recorded footage from the RD unit had cut off on collision, but not before sending the entire footage to the blockchain for storage. I began to feel lightheaded from the loss of blood from my wounds. The last thing I remember before passing out in my chariot was seeing security warriors pursuing the fleeing scavenger baboons back towards desert territory. The autopilot brought me home and alerted my neighborhood medic. My wounds were not life-threatening, and I was back in my workshop a few days later, finishing work on the traditional masks for the temple. The power crystal was installed successfully, and a local mechanic came to repair my chariot. I shared the recorded footage from the incident with the local news station and on social media, receiving 20 million views in one day, and many influencers invited me for interviews. For a week, I felt like a village hero. News of more incidents on scavenger hijacking and kidnapping began to circulate. Apparently, an Igbo female Afro Ape with bluish fur and hooped earrings was also interviewed days after the incident. She claimed to have escaped from scavengers too after being kidnapped for ransom. She looked kind of familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen her before. The end.